Welcome to the Cutting Edge podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph. This is Cutting Edge episode for January 2022. Welcome. We're going to be doing a bit of a different kind of episode tonight. We're going to be lightly touching a little bit on social engineering, but we're going to be adding in a perspective of social responsibility when it comes to social engineering. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they have a higher responsibility than one would might think when it comes to social engineering due to the, bad or poor consequences that could potentially come as a result. The thing is that like one of the reasons why I teach social engineering within the CSJ community, it's because I'm trying to get people to understand all of like how they can actually improve their relationships with other people. So, a social responsibility when it comes to social engineering, and I teach social engineering to help people benefit their relationships ultimately. It's not necessarily to like take advantage of other people, although people can use that, and I expose that use to everybody. But the reality of the situation is that it can be used for good, and I think everybody needs to be willing to accept that outcome as a potential outcome when it comes to social engineering. So that's really, really important. So I'm going to kind of give you guys a basic idea, to look at when you're considering cognitive functions and social engineering specifically, because it's a lot deeper than most people actually think. So let me open up my whiteboard right now, and we'll whiteboard this out for everybody. So, okay, social responsibility, social engineering. So, all basic relationships are based on two fundamental things. We have needs, and then we also have wants. Needs and wants. And this is a very Nietzschean perspective. But, throughout all relationships, you really have to make sure that you are aware of this dynamic when it comes to needs versus wants at all times. If you guys haven't read Friedrich Nietzsche, I highly recommend you do read Friedrich Nietzsche, especially his principal work, which actually has a couple of sections devoted to the idea of needs versus wants. Because one of the biggest criticisms that he holds towards society, and not just society, but also even the nuclear family or even the context of relationships themselves, is that a lot of people base their relationships on one or the other. But as I'm going to explain today, in the context of a sexual relationship, needs versus wants actually have a shift. Because when you're dating, it's all about wants, but when you're actually like in a committed relationship, it's actually all about needs. Needs becomes the primary thing, whereas wants was the primary thing before. But eventually, if wants are neglected, it could cause the relationship to break down. But if needs are definitely neglected, the relationship will break down even faster, because in that context, the relationship is actually primarily focused on needs. But I'm not really going to be touching on that very much within this episode. I want to talk specifically about cognitive functions and just things that people need to be aware of when you're trying to attempt to social engineer somebody for your benefit, but also for their benefit. Um, it's it's really necessary to consider. So we're gonna pick on Maggie Hess for this episode. So congratulations for volunteering. You've just been voluntold. So we're gonna put her cognitive functions here on the board. We're gonna bother Maggie today. So here's her functions right here. She is definitely an ENFP without question. So we're going to put down her ENFP functions right here, and we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna have some really good fun with Maggie today. All right, so let's also make sure that we got hero, parent, child, inferior, but we're just gonna put infant here because we can. Nemesis, Critic, and then Trickster, and then the Demon, naturally. Okay, and let's go back to purple, and we have Maggie right here. Okay, so let's actually put another column here, and then we're gonna do some orange. We're gonna do some needs, and then we're gonna do some green. We're gonna do some wants. Okay, and then we're gonna go here, positive, negative, and then positive and negative. Okay, and let's get another divider line just because we can. LOL. Alright, so I never actually really delved into the actual inner workings of social engineering itself. You could kind of see this episode as like a companion piece or like a bonus material for season 21 social engineering playlist. If you haven't watched season 21, please do. It's on the YouTube channel. It's publicly available to anyone. Or if you have, if you own Discover at csjoseph.life/portal, but you have Discover for all 16 types, all of the season 21 episodes are in each of the individual pages for each of the types, and I highly recommend you guys check that out just for additional context when it comes to understanding this specific form of, or like our approach right now. But the thing is that like this represents a deeper representation when it comes to social engineering. Before I talk about social responsibility, I think we need to kind of break down social engineering into its mechanical parts first so that we can actually arrive to what the social responsibility is. And I will admit that the social responsibility is nothing more than my personal opinion, if not maybe a philosophy. Uh, but I still think it's valid and worth sharing. But the thing is that we really have to actually understand how social engineering actually works within someone's head, like by default. So needs versus wants, right? Positive and negative. Okay. So we're gonna do some red here. So for NE, obviously, you want to make them feel wanted, right? That's a need. But what happens when it's a want? Well, then it's actually they want to feel desired. It's deeper. It's compulsive, as a point. And obviously is the, not wanted, right? Not desired. The not. That's kind of pretty obvious. All right, for FI, the need is to basically, it's to be important, you know, being important. And the negative for that one is being downplayed, you know, downplayed. That's really, really sad. Um, the TE need is actually about respect. They want to be respected or regarded, um, etc. Maybe this is where downplayed was supposed to be, if I remember correctly. Regard, and then, slander, etc. That would suck. FI really just wants to, it just wants to be heard, really. It just wants to be heard. Not listened to, but heard. It's like a form of venting. They just want to be able to vent, basically, from that regard. And then with introverted sensing, obviously they want to be comfy. That's important. Considered. That's another one. Considered. That's a huge need, etc. Freedom. That's a big one. Extroverted feeling. I believe it's accepted. Um, and then we have also extrovert feeling other than accepted. Valued, made top priority. There's a bunch of different ways to interpret this. And then TI is listened to, and then extroverted sensing is it's really just attention. It's really just attention. Okay, So don't forget, obviously, this is kind of where their ego is. This is kind of where they need to be responsibility. This is kind of where their fun is. This is kind of their needs in general, like their biggest needs. Fun, I'd actually want to say wants for their child. And then their worry is here. It's also fear, also exists here. The critic function, that's kind of like where their wisdom or foolishness exists. And then, unaware, mastery. Okay. And then hate versus love, naturally. All things that we know and have known. So when it comes to like Maggie's brain, you have to understand like when you're trying to social engineer someone, you have to provide their cognitive function with something. You are either going to provide a negative or a positive need, a positive or negative want, basically. And depending on the context of your relationship with a particular person that you're trying to social engineer, you need to realize is if needs or wants are actually the priority. In some cases, it may be both. In some cases, it would be just one or the other. In some cases, you want to use a positive from one while doing a negative to another, something TIFE users use consistently when they're trying to social engineer other people. They like to break people down before they build them up, etc. So based on that, there's so many different ways to skin this cat when it comes to social engineering, but ultimately these are like in general the kind of wheels that are turning, in an area. So like for example, we know Maggie here, she worries about her own future, she worries about being able to be free later, and she doesn't want to be stuck. She really needs because it's an infant, and because it's a need, she's afraid of not having that need not met. That infant inside, that infant SI is afraid that its diaper is not going to get changed, or it's afraid that it's not going to have its bottle, basically. That's really what it comes down to. The infant is where a person's needs exist, and because needs are ultimately more important than wants, which is what her inner child is all about, like if you're going to be targeting like what somebody really wants, you hit their child, but then you also give them what they want and their child at the same time. So like what would a TE child like actually want, well, if you want to give them what they want, if the need is regarding slander, then what they want is fame. It's fame. So if you really want to give them a positive, for that, then it's not. The negative want is the opposite of fame, and that is shame. Basically, fame and shame, right? Fame and shame, positive, negative for the inner child. And depending, and slander, that's more of like regard or slander, it's basic, but once they're more pronounced, they can be more damaging. But you have to understand that there's a need and a want, positive and negative for both, that applies to each of the cognitive functions, but then each of those needs and wants are accentuated or adjusted specifically by the cognitive attitude itself, because the cognitive attitude changes their relationship with being wanted or being heard, being regarded or respected, being comfy or considered, freedom, being listened to, etc. A negative aspect of being listened to, obviously is, being dismissed, right? Dismissed. And there's a time and place to dismiss somebody. There's a time and place to avoid that behavior, etc. But you guys, I hope you're tracking with what I'm trying to say here in terms of how to actually go about social engineering. You need to be aware of these individual components. So first thing you need to know is the target's cognitive function stack, okay? Which is, you just go through the type grid, and then once you identify their type, you know their cognitive functions. Then you apply their cognitive attitudes to their cognitive stack, so you know how each of those cognitive functions behave within their mind, but within the context of the attitude. After that, you need to be aware of the positive and negative needs per function inside of each attitude and how it behaves in each side of attitude, and you also need to know their wants, positive and negative. You have to have literally all of this information available to you, either written down or in your head on the fly, so that you can actually perform proper social engineering. So when it comes to relationships, it's really, really easy, you know, because once you know what their need is, like expert sensors, they need attention. So then you just take away attention. You see what I'm saying? Um, but then, beyond attention, what do they want more than attention? Well, they want you to stick around. They want loyalty. You know, you see what I'm saying? Loyalty is deeper, and a want is deeper, whereas a need is kind of it's shallow. So let's put that over here. Wants are deeper. Needs, they're shallower. It's kind of interesting if you think about that, because when you're dating somebody and you're like, in the infatuation phase, you're dating someone new for the first time, everything's like super excited. You're getting, eventually there'll be like the honeymoon phase, etc., and then the honeymoon phase will be over. Like the wants are there. It's all about deep love, deep connection, all about hitting those wants as much as possible. You're making Maggie here feel famous, basically. You're making her feel highly desired with great passion, right? You're hitting all the positive wants, but needs, they're not as important. But then if you think about it post honeymoon phase and you're in a committed relationship with Maggie, all of a sudden the needs, while they are shallower, they end up becoming a higher priority. She just needs to come home to a safe and very clean environment. You see what I'm saying? Uh, she needs you to just give her the basic respect and regard and not ever really slander her. Fame is cool before, but it wasn't as important now. It's like a new phase of life. Now, eventually, that's not to say that wants, go away inside of a sexual relationship, especially when you're in like a committed long-term relationship. It's not to say that it doesn't go away. It actually is there. And it is important to meet the wants of your partner, for example, in a sexual relationship, or anyone to meet their wants. But depending on how long you've known the person, the needs ends up the longer you know somebody, because like for example, familiarity breeds contempt, right? So the more familiar you are with somebody, the more the needs become an issue. And this is why I just said it. Familiarity breeds contempt. And why? It's because the people you are more familiar with, the human brain naturally expects needs to be met. Expects needs to be met. It's like a survival mechanism, basically. The human brain expects needs to be met, and by the people that you are most familiar with. This is why it's all about sparks and fireworks when you're in a relationship with somebody new, and it's all about wants, because there's not enough familiarity there. But the more familiarity there is, the wants go down, the needs become a bigger issue. We talked about this earlier when going through Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. She says the closer you are in a relationship, or as I would say, the more familiar you are with somebody in a relationship, the sexual desire and the libido even of both partners actually goes down. It drops down. The only way to increase libido or sexual desire between two people is to increase sexual tension. And sexual tension only comes as a result of separation. So the less familiar you are with a person, the more it goes in the directions of want. So if you're trying to social engineer a person that you're not as familiar with, then you're going to want to target their wants, right? However, when it comes to when you're social engineering somebody that you are more familiar with, you're going to want to target the needs of their functions, basically, positive or negative, depending on the particular situation. Just understand is that what really drives this is the level of familiarity that you have with a person, okay? So right here, we'll just put it here, you know, am I you have to see this like a spectrum. Am I familiar, right? And where am I on this spectrum? Am I at 1 familiarity? Am I at 100 familiarity? What is my level of familiarity? The higher, I'm sorry, I did this backwards. 100 here and then just 1 right there. So the higher you are in familiarity with a person, the more you need to target the needs. The lower you are in familiarity, the more you want to target the wants. So if you're like a stranger or estranged with somebody that you used to know, Wants are way more important. And it really bothers me because a lot of people out there, when they're just talking to people they haven't seen in a very long time versus people that they know on a regular basis, like sharing needs, if you think about it, is actually kind of a very intimate and close thing. Most people don't talk about what their needs actually are with strangers. They talk about their wants and their dreams and their desires and their passions with strangers. They only are comfortable enough to talk needs with people that they are the most familiar with. And if that's all you take from this cutting edge episode, then you've hit you got it. Like, that is the main point I'm trying to make. You have to understand where familiarity comes in to play when you're considering social engineering someone, because it's all about wants. If you're a stranger or just met, or you are estranged with the person trying to become more familiar with them, and then it switches to needs. It's just like I've been saying, though. If this was a sexual relationship, you need to come up with a way to create space so you can bring wants back in, so that your relationship can be balanced between needs versus wants. This is why I maintain, as I've said recently in season 25, episode 4, which just released, and by the way, episode 5 was just filmed and will be released soon. Uh, in season 25, episode 4, I talk about how the pedagogue relationship, which is the companionship relationship, in my opinion, is the absolute best, uh, technically speaking, because it has highest sexual compatibility with perception functions, but it has really high camaraderie, aka low compatibility with decision-making functions. So this actually keeps an air of or an environment within your relationship. It keeps you familiar and also unfamiliar at the same time. It allows you to maintain sexual tension within the relationship. That way, you can still actually have good sex. Which, if you're not having good sex in a relationship, your relationship will ultimately break down. Whether or not anyone's willing to admit it or not, sex is the most important thing in any relationship. It is the whole point of the relationship. I don't care if women disagree with me on that. I really don't care. That's probably just more evidence of their solipsism. But the reality of the situation is like, if there isn't sexuality, then the relationship is a complete waste of time. And I recommend, at least the men exit the relationship as soon as possible, because they're obviously being taken advantage of. And sex is extremely cheap anyway, and doesn't like it does not have as much meaning nowadays as it used to have in terms of its meaning. So please be aware of that. But again, familiarity breeds contempt. And familiarity is the compass by which you figure out, okay, do I need to do social engineering from a wants perspective, or do I need to do social engineering from a needs perspective? Which perspective, which plan of attack do I move forward with? And then from there, you have to determine whether or not it's positive or it's negative. And then obviously, you have to be aware of how that is going to affect functions as they behave within their specific attitudes: hero, parent, child, infant, nemesis, critic, trickster, demon. You just have to be aware of all of that information. But this is everything anyone would ever need to know in order to actually successfully social engineer another human being. You just have to know this. That's it. That's really all you have to know. How familiar am I with the person? Okay, that determines needs or wants. Okay, am I doing positive or negative here? Okay, great. How are they going to respond to me based on their cognitive attitudes? And then also with cognitive attitudes, don't forget, if you hit one function, it's going to affect the function that it's in orbit with. It's also going to affect the function that it's in axis with as well. So don't forget what axes and orbits actually look like. Let's see here. So this is an axis, this is an axis, this is an axis, this is an axis. And then orbit-wise, we can do an orbit. Hero to nemesis, parent to critic, child to trickster, and infant to demon. Those are all the orbits. So by now you're thinking like, this is crazy. Does anyone really have all of this in their head when they're interacting with other human beings? I do. 100% of the time. I always have this in mind 100% of the time, anytime I'm interacting with any human being whatsoever. I am aware of all of this going on simultaneously in my head, interacting with any human being. Sometimes I get lazy though and just let go of it and just don't care. But when it's really important, or there's something that needs to happen, or there's something that I need or want out of the situation, because that's really what social engineering is all about. You want to know what it's all about? Getting my needs or wants met. That is the true definition of social engineering right there. Getting my needs and wants met. That's all it is. And notice how it's all about the other person's needs and wants. You see what I'm saying, folks? This is the entire point of social engineering. That's what it is. And this is where the social responsibility comes into play. Does cognitive focus make a difference? Not really. It really not really. It does not make that much of a difference. So thank you for asking that question. That was a good question. But social engineering equals the true definition of social engineering is getting my needs and wants met. That's what all social interaction is. That's what social engineering is. Social engineering is also synonymous with the term social interaction. All it really is getting my needs and wants met. That's all social engineering is. And everybody is social engineering every other person. Everyone is manipulating every other person out there, whether or not they can accept that or not. Every human being is manipulative because every human being is trying to get their needs and their wants met. And whether or not you're aware of it or not, this is how they do it psychologically. You may not be conscious that you're doing this entire thing that I have up here on the board, but you are actually doing it unconsciously or subconsciously, and in some cases consciously. But now that you have the specific framework as to how our brains actually work and how our brains actually process this information, and it's way easier to social engineer types that you're the most familiar with. That would be types that are in your own temple, as you're using cognitive projection and you're projecting your own temple, the 4 types that are in your temple. Like my temple is the heart temple, so that would be ENTP, INTJ, ESFP, ISFJ types. So the heart temple, I'm projecting them onto other people. And social engineering, heart temple, is extremely easy for me to do. That's not to say that I can't social engineer other types as well, but I'm the most familiar with them because those types are in my head. And in some cases, I have to remind myself that I may not be familiar with a particular heart temple person, and then when I start social engineering them from the needs point of view, I need to switch to the wants point of view. But again, it all follows the same process. Step 1. What type is this person? Okay. Step 2. What is their functions? Step 3. What is their attitudes and axis and orbits? Okay. Step 4. How familiar am I with them? Okay. Step 5. XYZ familiarity equals needs versus wants. And then step 6. Once I've chosen needs versus wants, do I do a positive or negative reinforcement on those particular functions? Okay? So getting my needs met is social engineering. And how it's done is through positive or negative reinforcement that targets needs and wants of specific cognitive functions inside of people's heads. This is how social engineering works. This is how all social interaction works underneath the hood. Completely. It's all underneath the hood. Maggie, most people in Western society are shadow focused. Most people in third world countries are subconscious focused. So based on that, you end up having this system. And, with great power comes great responsibility. The thing is that people are unaware that they use this system already. But I think the more aware that people are using this system from a psychological perspective gives them, a lot more ammo, because then all of a sudden they realize, oh, I have a lot more tools at my disposal that I didn't realize I had, right? But it still comes with a huge social responsibility. And this is where, the interest-based types would start coming into play, because if you're going to social engineer someone, if you're going to be trying to get your needs and your wants met, and especially, Maggie here, because we're picking on her today. She's triple affiliative. She's all about doing the right thing. She's like, she would tell us that it is everybody's responsibility to make sure that we are creating win-win scenarios when it comes to getting my needs and wants met, which means it's like trading. It's kind of transactional. As much as I hate to admit it because I'm a crusader type and the idea of being transactional in terms of a relationship is absolutely disgusting to me, personally. But that's just my personal crusader bias. TI Parent still knows at the end of the day, if we're really going to reduce everything down to the mechanical parts and actually look at every individual blade of grass or weed on the ground compared to the forest, the reality of the situation is that all relationships are transactional in some capacity. So those transactions are conducted based on needs versus wants. Maggie here would be encouraging all of us to make sure that not only in our endeavors to get our own needs and wants met, she would be encouraging us to make sure that the other person involved, that we're getting our needs and wants met via or through them, that we're doing the same and reciprocating to that person. So it ends up becoming reciprocation. And that, my friends, is actually the definition of a relationship. It is reciprocation. And is reciprocation of needs and wants. Okay? Right from Nietzsche. This whole model, folks, comes from Nietzsche. It's Dr. John Beebe mixed with Dario Nardi and Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, that's literally what this entire model is that I'm presenting to you right now. Okay, so uh, okay, let's see if I missed any questions here. I have not seen to miss any questions. So, and that's really what the social responsibility is all about. Sometimes though, like, you get in a really rough situation and you kind of have no choice but to social engineer for the sake of survival, and sometimes you end up creating a win-lose situation where the other person loses because it may actually be your survival, your highest need at that point. But even in a sexual relationship, and this is talked about in the manosphere consistently, which is the old adage, when it comes to a sexual relationship, one person's sexual strategy will be dominant and the other person's sexual strategy will be submissive. And the submissive sexual strategy, their sexual strategy is basically just going to have to be completely let go of, ultimately, and they'll have to surrender to the sexual strategy of whoever's the dominant person in the relationship. The problem is that within the United States of America, or Western society as we know it, a woman's hypergamy ends up becoming the primary sexual strategy within Western society. Whereas if you look in Middle Eastern society, a man's polygyny, their sexual strategy, ends up becoming the primary sexual strategy that is the most socially accepted, right? It is also what those societies are the most familiar with. If you think about it, Western society is more familiar with hypergamy than it is with polygyny, whereas Eastern society is more familiar with polygyny than it is hypergamy. Very, very fascinating perspective if you actually think about it. Um, I really hope you folks are as plagued by such thoughts as I am when it comes to considering these nuances. But regardless of how things are being presented from a macro level on like the perspective of Western society, etc., we still have a social responsibility. If you're not in that situation where your survival depends on it, etc., for example, somebody stealing from another human being or robbing another human being to survive, etc., if it's not really that situation, I really highly recommend that everyone realize that given the transactional nature of every single relationship out there, please don't forget to make sure that their wants and needs are being met and that you are creating a win-win situation within the context of that relationship, and don't create win-loses. I mean, think about it. Do you really want someone doing that to you? It really just boils down to that verse in the Bible that says, love your neighbor as yourself. The greatest commandment. love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Loving your neighbor as yourself is literally just about this. It is reciprocation of needs versus wants in a social engineering scenario. So don't forget that social responsibility of love your neighbor as yourself in the context of you getting your needs and wants met. Okay? That is what social engineering is. That is what manipulation is for. It is the engine of getting my needs, wants met. But you still have to realize that there is another person that you're taking from and you have to give back. And this is where people like Maggie, for example, I'm not saying Maggie does this, but sometimes they like to play God and they find the other party not as deserving as they are, or they're worried about the next opportunity that they will have to take, so they take a little bit extra. This can be a problem and it creates imbalance. And having that kind of imbalance in the world leads to eventual collective conflict that could actually even start a war one day. Okay? So that if we could just collectively, from an idealistic NF perspective, when we're all seeking to get our needs and wants from our fellow human beings, we need to make sure that we're taking responsibility and going out of our way to meet their needs and their wants at the same time. And then when it comes to public policy per se, that we are aware of the transactional relationship between all relationships, any form of relationships, even a business relationship. It's funny because even in the 1700s, they would call that a commerce of relationships, basically. So it's very important. It's very nuanced. Jay Patel's got a question. Is it easier for me to focus on a person's needs the more familiar I become with them? Yes. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Patel, for asking that question. Yes, the answer is yes. So, SE users have a bias or a preference with meeting other people's needs because of the nature of extroverted sensing, okay? Because they're typically meeting needs of SI users. NE users have the same thing. They're typically meeting the needs of NI users, giving them choices, meeting their wants of NI users. So the thing is, folks, is that regardless of your type, you have to be aware of a bias. Whatever your cognitive functions are, you're going to favor meeting needs versus wants. Because needs intrinsically are usually SI, and wants are intrinsically usually NI. So you have to and I'm talking in general. I'm not talking about Maggie's four or eight functions specifically here. I'm just saying that SE users in her life would be more biased towards meeting her needs, whereas NE users in her life would be more biased towards meeting her wants, regardless of which of those functions they are, just because of their basic nurtural behavior. Nurture being the export of a person's nature internally, and they're exporting that extroverted energy, that extroverted information, which literally comes down to what they want, etc. So, Jay, I really hope that answered your question. But again, yes, SE users are biased towards meeting the needs of the 8 functions of people that they come into contact with, and NE users are biased towards meeting the wants. You also have to recognize that it is our social responsibility, regardless of what type we are, to go out of our way to meet both sides, regardless if we're lacking an NE or an SE function. And think about it. Do you know how hard that is for me with SE Demon? Anyone who has an extroverted perception demon function really struggles in this area. And it's so easy to call people like me entitled or depraved because we're all about our own experience and our own needs while completely ignoring the needs of other people. So people like me end up having the absolute hardest and largest struggle throughout. Okay? So please be aware of that dynamic. Okay? All right, I'm actually at the end of the episode now anyway, and that's why I took that question. So if you guys got any more questions, let's scroll up in the chat here. Let's say Sarah Hoffman made the statement, I feel like saying that a curse is getting less than you put in is transactional even, but not in a bad way. I mean, I could see where you're coming in with that, but the thing is that we still have the responsibility of meeting another person's needs or wants as we're trying to get our own needs and wants met. I mean, that's the reason. I mean, getting our own needs and wants met is the reason why we do cognitive projection. And there's another cutting edge episode that's devoted to cognitive projection and what cognitive projection is about. I think I even talked about it in season 18. Um, but yeah, like you really have to understand that this is like the entire dynamic here. You know, familiarity guiding you towards needs versus wants, and being able to abstract that familiarity and be aware of familiarity that you may have with another person, that can really change the game. That could really make things completely different for you personally. And but again, you still have your own internal natural bias as to whether or not you're going to meet someone else's needs or wants by default, just based on the four functions, whichever your top perception functions, your top two perception functions in your brain are anyway. So you still have to realize, again, that's your responsibility. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everybody would love to be treated that way. So go and make sure that you're going out there and treating other people that way. It's super critical, okay? It's very, very important. All right. Any questions, though? Is there really any questions? Oh, and by the way, Sarah, like when you're talking about a curse getting less than you put into it, it's possible that that person may not be aware of their bias of trying to meet your wants when you actually need your needs met. You see what I'm saying? So please forgive those people for having that bias because they may be ignorant of how all of this works and they may lack the life experience necessary for them to have healthy relationships. The people who have the healthiest relationships, really at the end of the day, are the ones who actually practice this, whether or not they're aware of it or not. They can be completely ignorant of this system as it is systematized, but at the end of the day, I think I think that would be fine, overall. So just forgive people. You still have to forgive people because they may not be as further along and or as aware of their own cognitive bias that they have. Um, so yeah. Okay, Amalgam asks. Oh, hold on. Some more questions came in. Okay. Jay Patel again. It's just hard for me to think about someone's wants in each function slot and differentiating that from needs. Is there an easier way to differentiate, or does that come with testing and failing? Dude, just look at the freaking chart of needs and wants in general for each of the cognitive functions and then just apply it from there. Use that as a standard. Obviously, trial and error is probably the best in the long run, but you'd have to write down all of the trial and error data as you do it over time. Just use the chart, dude. Melissa Walker asks, is it hard to meet others' needs when you're not sure of your own needs? No. The answer to that is no. Like, for example, you have an SI demon like Jay Patel here in the audience. He's not really aware of his needs as much as, like, you would be, Melissa Walker, but he'd still be able to meet your needs because he's an SE user. So the answer to that question is no. And honestly, that tradition, is I know I've said that in the past, but you really got to think about it now in this context of social engineering needs versus wants. Amalgam asks, would it stand the reason that SI Demon has a hard time getting its own needs? Yes. And if so, what does that look like? They just kind of ignore themselves. They ignore their own body. They just ignore themselves, and they're extremely externally focused. That's really what it comes down to. All right. Okay. Well, Maggie, everyone knows you're an ENFP anyway, so who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it was another ENFP in the crowd, like, I would have said the same thing. So, yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, that completes this month's episode of the Cutting Edge Podcast with C.S. Joseph. And thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And I hope you all get something really good out of it, and it assists you in your social engineering approaches. So, anyway, that being said, I'll see you guys probably tonight. Later.